Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another podcast with a friend that I've run into many times over, at least online, but I've run into in the jungles of Costa Rica, I've run into in many different contexts, but have always been a fan of your work, always been a fan of what you stand for, but more importantly, how you stand for it, right? It's one thing to say that you care about the environment, to care about sustainability. It's another to push that to the limit. And I would say that you have definitely inspired me and many others around the globe to consider the impact that everyday people have on the environment. Everyday people have in terms of consumption, everyday people have in terms of what they're doing. So for some of you, Rob Greenfield is not a stranger. He has made a ton of videos online. He's definitely gone viral multiple times over for whether it be dumpster diving or biking across America or wearing your trash for 30 days in New York City, living like an average person. But most recently, and this is something I have not talked to you about, you spent a year literally living off of food you either foraged or grew. Is that correct?
That's right.
Tell me more about who you are, what you do, what you love. And tell me more about this year. I mean, that's a serious amount of time to invest in what I consider to be a pretty powerful feat in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to be here, sitting in cold Montreal with you.
I had no idea you were making it out, but I'm happy you're down.
It was very last minute. I was not planning on coming here.
Mm-hmm.
I was invited to do a little talk show, and I was already going to New York, so I decided to pop up to Montreal. I took the train up.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I just finished, 1 month ago. What's today, the 11th?
The 12th?
The 12th?
Friday the
13th. No, Friday the 13th or Friday the 13th.
So on November 11th, so 1 month ago, I finished my year of growing and foraging all my food.
Mm-hmm.
So that means for an entire year, no grocery stores, no restaurants, nothing packaged, nothing processed, nothing shipped long distances, not even vitamins, no, for the entire year, nature was my garden, my pantry, and my pharmacy, even my medicine. Literally everything that went past these lips for the year, I either had to grow in my gardens or go out into nature,
mm-hmm.
as we call it, and harvest it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite the year. It was, I would say, maybe the most beautiful year of my adult life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, how you're doing that? First of all, where did you get the idea of doing this? And I know you're no stranger to, I don't want to cheapen it by saying the word stunts, but by doing something that is going to get a lot of publicity and then kind of start a conversation.
Yeah.
You've done many of these different things before. I think probably some of the more viral content is you just going into different dumpsters behind either a grocery store or just wherever it is. And just finding, look how much food is expired and look how much food is thrown out with all the packaging and all the things that go with that. But what kind of inspired you to say, you know what, I'm capable of doing this. I feel like, this is a big challenge, and, it's one thing to do it for a month. It's another to do it for 12.
Yeah.
What inspired all of that?
Well, I guess, the dumpster diving plays a role. I mean, basically, if we rewind to 2011, 8 years ago, that's when I woke up to the reality of the world that I lived in. I lived in this sort of blissful way where I didn't have any realization that my actions as an individual affected the world.
Mm-hmm.
I was just living my life, consuming whatever I needed, buying whatever I wanted, doing whatever I wanted, and not thinking about how my actions affected other people on the other side of the world, other species, and just in the world as a whole. We call it nature, but of course nature, we are nature, nature is us, so just the world, how my actions affected it. And basically I woke up by watching documentaries, reading books, and I just realized that every single thing that I was doing was causing destruction to the world. The food I was eating, the car I was driving, the cheap junk that I was buying, the trash that I was making, even the water that I was drinking was being pumped across the desert from Arizona to San Diego and was evaporating into the desert to get to me. So I just realized almost everything that I was doing was causing destruction, but the big one was food. Most all of us eat at least 3 times per day. For a lot of us it's 10 to 20 times a day.
Snacks
I know me eating all the time. It's the center of our lives. It's the center of our social lives, our health, our existence. Food has created our culture as we know it to a large extent. And so for me, I always come back to food as it's many things. It's the great destroyer of the world, because all 7 billion people eat. Not all 7 billion people fly, but all 7 billion people eat. But it's also the great equalizer, in the sense that because everybody eats, it's one of the greatest ways to get people to self-reflect on their own lives, because food is us.
It's very democratized.
Yeah. So basically, one of the early projects was dumpster diving. That's where I learned about the food waste system and how we waste half of our food. I learned that I could live completely off of the waste of our globalized, industrialized food system, which was great. I could not support those systems, not spend any money, and get to eat like a king. And that was powerful, but I wanted to actually see if I could step away from that system completely and have a different kind of power of, is it possible to exist in 2018, 2019, the 21st century, without these systems? And that's when I decided, a day isn't really enough. A month would be meaningful, but it was like not enough. So I decided a year, if I could do an entire year without those systems, really producing my own food, then that would be an immersive enough project where I could really see if it's possible.
And what did you find? How did, tell me about the experience. I think there's something to be said about, there's lots of challenges with people talk about food deserts and the things that go with that, right? In particular in low-income housing areas, there's challenges that say, well, there's no Whole Foods in my hometown because we're not rich enough, or our community isn't rich enough to deserve one, quote unquote, right? There's all these things that people say get in the way of having that healthy lifestyle. It's cost prohibitive in some cases, right? Eating organic or eating certain things might be more expensive than obviously eating the cheaper foods that you see at the dollar menu or whatever. But what did you come out with as some of the lessons and some of the takeaways that you had from actually living this lifestyle?
Yeah, there's no doubt that our food system is not just. Our food system focuses on profit. So they're going to go where they can make money, and that's from affluent people. So they're not going to service the people that are in lower income scenarios that result in being food deserts. That's why I want to step away from that system and try to empower people also to step away from that system and take power back from big ag and these corrupt, unjust systems. So I think for me, one of the things that I really like to get people thinking about, I really focus. I do these extreme stunts, as you said, that are designed to really grab attention. But the whole idea is really to get us to zoom way out on our lives and really deeply look at the institutions, the systems that we're a part of, and ask, are these serving us the way that they should be, and is it serving ourselves, our communities? So for me with this project, that was a big part of it. And the idea is not that I want anybody to grow and forage all of their food. It's just about thinking, does food have to be monetized? A lot of people have never looked at food in any other way than in the aisle of a grocery store, buying it with money. And I've seen, just planting a garden in a front yard or planting fruit trees in a public place. For some people, that's the first time they've ever realized that food can be growing freely and abundantly all around us, and that it doesn't have to be monetized, and it literally just grows. It just literally grows for free from air, soil, water, sun.
Yeah, I have to put myself in that camp. You know what I mean? I 7-8 years ago now, I walked out in the middle of a GMO corn and soya field and planted a tree, but that was the first time I ever did that.
Yeah.
I had never planted anything in my life. Food for me came from the fridge, and further than the fridge, it came from IGA, which is the local grocery store here or whatever, right? But and I say local, meaning a chain grocery store, right? And realistically, where it comes from there is Guatemala or avocados from California or water from this place or that place. Like, there's all these systems that brought this essentially privilege to us. And it's the first time in history that, you know, we've really been able to move away from like a job perspective or a time perspective away from the rural kind of farm life into this urban and even more so privileged suburban life where everything is just delivered at kind of arm's length. And now go to the layers further, Amazon is delivering, you know, within 24 hours, you'll get whatever you want in the world delivered to you. I mean, we're in this system that obviously cannot sustain for all. And I think people are shocked to know, and I think it's becoming more well known now, that the food that they eat requires a ton of water, requires and cuts down a ton of rainforest, particularly in the Amazon rainforest, or has many dire consequences to it, but I don't believe still to this day that we know what we can do about it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have watched Cowspiracy. I think a lot of people have watched Forks Over Knives or one of these Netflix documentaries or whatever it is that talk about some of these different issues. And I think some people are like looking to move away slowly from certain things, like, okay, no more plastic straws, let's save the turtles, or no more little, you know, there's details of how people are kind of getting there. But in the end, systematically, we were set up to fail.
Yeah.
Right? Like, people go out, yeah, you could get the food at a restaurant delivered to you on a plate, but realistically, it came in packaging before it got cooked, and you know what I mean? Like, there's many layers of single-use plastics, of inefficient systems, and then to know that most of the food that ends up on our grocery shelves, even from there, gets thrown out.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we... Do you feel like we're actually, like this impact is being had, that we are actually moving in the direction of this self-empowerment? Like, I sometimes feel a large amount of apathy, and I can imagine that for somebody like you who really takes it to another level, that there's that internal struggle of being like, fuck, is this really working?
Yeah, so I mean, for me personally, I don't think apathy is something that I almost ever feel. The reason why is because I actually don't look at 100 years from now. I don't look at 200, 500 years from now. I think about those things, but I focus on now. I focus on what I can do as an individual to improve quality of life around me. So during my time in Orlando, I helped plant 200 community fruit trees that are freely available for anybody to pick from, you know, along the sidewalk, medians, in people's front yards, public parks, and such. Those will be
no permits, right? Just go there, plant it, make it happen.
Yeah, except we only pick places that strategically we're pretty certain those trees are going to
stay and not get cut down or whatever it is. Yeah. So the point is that in a few years' time, those are going to be producing fruit. It's going to be delicious and nutritious fruit that can improve people's quality of life, at the same time can get them outside of the mindset that they are dependent upon corporations. And it can beautify communities, it can bring people together by having shared resources. So the idea is that that's something that can improve the quality of the world around me immediately, and at the same time, if humanity was able to overcome the massive global crises that we're in, planting fruit trees is a part of the long-term strategy for climate change. So the way that I design things is I don't do things that need 30 years to have their positive impact. I design it so that it's going to have its positive impact now, and I can see that. What that does is that empowers me. It makes me makes me successful in the short term and allows me to fuels your ambition or your hope in the entire process.
Yeah, and then for me personally, I mean, to answer that question, I don't think that humanity is going to solve all of these problems. And that doesn't make me feel bad, and it doesn't make me feel depressed, because I can't control that. I can only control how I live today, taking responsibility for my actions and doing my best to inspire positive action in other people, whether it's politicians way up at the top or just the people walking, you know, down the street or through the park with me that day.
You must be starting to get invited to the conversation with different people at different scales as well, right? Like, given what you've done and given that you've built a reputation, basically a career out of this at this point, it seems, it's kind of your job to tell the story. It's become your, like, you've evangelized something that at the end of the day you realize you're a part of the problem, and now you're saying, hey, what can I do to be a part of the solution? And you must see kind of goodwill flowing through different layers of government, or different layers of institutions, or different layers of this. What is the conversation that you're having on that front? Like, what, as the city of Orlando, for example, come up to you and say, you know what, we would love to get more fruit trees in the ground. Like, are you starting to see systemic change around you, or are you starting to be invited to kind of, I don't know, speak at that, make plans that support those different things? I mean, like, I always thought that there would be more of that, you know, having started Valhalla and having kind of participated in these things. I always thought that there would be more of that conversation that would come to fruition over time. But, you know, Lawrence, who's behind the camera here, and I went to the Paris climate talks at one point, right? And the famous Paris Climate Agreement was signed, and at COP21, and all the things that went on with that. And what I remember feeling there is that it was just all talk.
Yeah.
It was just all nonsense. Like, the entire thing felt like it was just self-masturbatory pat on the back that says, we trying to do something. And I'm not trying to say that there's no impact or funds that eventually move to different things, but it all just feels, I don't know, it feels fruitless. It feels like politics and not direct action and not actual impact.
Yeah, I personally don't get involved in those scenarios because there's so much greenwashing, and there's so much people building their own careers to get elected or get reelected. I work with smaller municipalities sometimes. Like, you know, I've planted fruit trees in parks, in city parks, where the mayor of the local town comes to us and says, we want to be a part of this. They come to me and I'm like, great. But I never go to the city because I know most of the time that either A, it's going to take months or years of getting through these red tapes, or that I'm going to actually just come into this situation where they're really just trying to, it's so much of it's image based, it's PR.
Like what Greta Thunberg is basically championing, like running around the world doing it in some ways.
I don't know what to say about that.
It's a tough one, right?
It is. I don't know. I mean, once something is that big, it's hard to really know what's going on.
Look, do I think that she's a government shill? No. I think she's a kid who went out and started protesting and did whatever thing. I don't think there's a giant conspiracy around how she got into it.
Yeah.
Do I know that, like, the premier or the prime minister of Canada stands on a stage next to her, and that's really good PR for him? That makes him feel like, oh, our government's responsible, and on the back end of things, they're signing deals for pipelines. Yeah, that's where the gray zone starts to fall. It's like she made she's making the largest climate march, continuous climate march, happening every freaking Friday. Probably happened today somewhere in the world, probably in Europe. But the idea of, like, that is happening all the time, and she's mobilizing, and, you know, there was one here in Montreal. It was 500,000 people, and somebody asked me, like, well, why didn't you go? And I said, because I said, look around. The climate march just ended. All I see is signs that were beautiful signs, nice messages. They all say save the planet, but the signs are on the curb right now. Yeah. And everyone finished the climate march and went to a bar or to a restaurant and just essentially perpetuated this system, because and I understand, like, I'm not judging people for eating at restaurants. Fuck, how many times I ate at a restaurant? I ate one last night. My brother's friend's restaurant. But the idea of all of these things kind of happening, it's so difficult for me to get involved in any of it other than things that literally put trees in the ground or feet boots on the soil that say, I'm ready to do the work. Yeah.
I mean, I think that protesting is needed, but I think we have we're
saturated.
We're doing not too much of that, but we need to match it with more action. Mm-hmm. We need, like, showing 500,000 or 1 million people in the streets, or even 10,000 in the streets. It shows that people care. It shows the desire. But the thing is, you know, in the United States, you can't march down the streets and demand for action from our current government. We know our current government's not going to do it. So it's really short-sighted to be putting all of our energy into asking the government to change. If you have 500,000 people that walk down the street together and then they all go do things together, then we could be creating insane systemic change. I mean, if we took those 500,000 people that put in 2 hours, that is 1 million hours of time. And if that 1 million hours of time went into urban farms, like starting small community gardens, we're talking about, or planting fruit trees. We could be planting millions of fruit trees to take power back from big ag.
Yeah, in 2 hours.
It's amazing what we could do at that time. But that's the challenge of our current movement, is that, well, unfortunately, I would say a vast majority of the movement does not go very deep. It is cool signs that say polar bears won't have a
planet. Save our planet. Yeah.
I get it, but we have to go so much deeper, and that's the challenge. Is that a lot of people don't want to go as deep as we need to go, but we need to go really deep, past the greenwashing, past the black and white, thought patterns, and really realize that everything is highly complicated and intricate and needs like deep thinking and diverse solutions. There's no
one solution. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It really depends on where you are too, right? Like there's different countries, different areas, different cities have different problems. I think that what works for, I don't know, building a community garden in SoCal is not going to be the same thing you can do in the cold winters of Montreal. Like you have to invest in different ways, and I believe that in some ways, like I do believe that to make an omelet you have to crack some eggs. Like we were just talking right before this about one of the best uses of fossil fuels is in probably season extending, in making like hooped greenhouses and plastic covered greenhouses that allow us to make way more production of food and be way more sustainable, because we can have maybe 2 crops or have way more food be produced in a particular area that for some parts of the year becomes a full total food desert.
Yeah.
And the capacity for changing the narrative is something I think you've done a very good job at. And I see that as being the primary issue at the moment. Is it's cool to say that you care about climate change. It's trendy to say that you bring your own cup or your own straw.
Yeah.
And it's important that happens. And it's important that sustainability becomes, I'll use the word sexy, but cool. Like it's something that is desirable and that other people see as kind of a social way of communicating a particular value. Great, all for it. But there was a study that showed that for every 1 article that talks about the solution to climate change, there are 80 that talks about the problem. Now, that might have shifted over the last couple of years. Is an old kind of study that I'm quoting here, or old kind of metric. But nonetheless, that still feels true to me.
Yeah.
It still feels very true to me that we do not have enough content talking about the solution.
It's easier to talk about the problems than it is the solution. And of course, we need to talk about the problems because a lot of people still need to wake up. They don't know the problems, but that's, my focus is I talk about the problem only as much as is needed to get the point across, and then the rest of the energy goes into, okay, you agree there's a problem? Now here is what you can do about it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, that's what I'm constantly sitting. I was going to say at home, but I don't have a home anymore. So wherever I'm sitting, I'm constantly like, as I walked over here, I'm thinking, how can I crack people's heads open? I'm just constantly trying to think, how can I really shake people up in a way where they get it, but then they feel like they need to actually take action. So I need to do that, like, wham, but then I give them the solutions in a way they feel like they can do it, where tomorrow they go out and they plant a seed and actually grow something, or tomorrow they now know how to buy food from local farmers rather than going to the big box store and getting everything packaged in long distance, or maybe they wake up to the fact that I don't need designer clothes and makeup, and I actually could be comfortable with myself. So that's what I'm really trying to do, is shake people up through these extreme projects, and then get them started. And, you know, I kind of think of it as gateways.
Mm-hmm.
So switching over to a reusable water bottle from plastic bottles is a minuscule change.
But it's a gateway into larger changes.
And then every time you're holding that, you can be thinking about it and feeling that slight bit of empowerment. And then the goal is that it'll be another change and another change and another change. One change isn't enough, but one change hopefully can empower them to, you know, keep on making more. So that's what I try to do with the work.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen the do you know who Mr. Beast is on YouTube? Okay, so there's this guy, he's the fastest growing YouTuber. I think he has like 29 million subscribers. But they did this he's known for like these ridiculous stunts. He mainly gives away a ton of money.
Okay.
He's phenomenal at like ordering a pizza and tipping the guy $10,000.
Okay.
Like crazy little stunts like that, but he does it like weekly at this point. It's all like it's incredible what he's been able to do. And he started a campaign called 20 Million Trees. He got 20 million subscribers, and somebody challenged him in the comments to plant 20 million trees.
Okay.
And apparently, like, they've raised enough money, $1 equals a tree kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
They've raised $16 million, so they've planted about 16, 17 million trees. I don't know exactly where they're at with it right now. But he's an example of someone who used the stunt to kind of mobilize a whole slew of things. And people are going to use that. Like Elon Musk donated $1 million, or I think it was $1 million, or 100,000. Yeah, and then somebody donated like $1,000,001 or whatever it is to kind of like, you know, and there's PR involved in that, right? Like obviously the fact that I just named that says Elon Musk, green, there's a brand association, all the things that go with that. And I think that's okay. I think it's necessary, in fact. But at least from a corporate business lens, they're going to see it as necessary for them to kind of see why they should put money and energy into something right now versus kind of kicking the can down the road, which is, I think, what we're seeing all the time. What stunt do you think that you've done, or what work that you've done got the closest to cracking people? Like, where do you feel? Because I feel like the year you just did, I think you proved something really powerful to yourself. But I know that the average person is going to be like, well, wait a second here. I get that. I can't do that. It's too far of a leap, right? But I think the dumpster diving thing, I think wakes people up. But again, the leap is far because they're like, I don't really want to go into the dumpster. Where are you seeing signs of kind of progress in this gateways that you're creating?
Well, pretty much everything that I've done has worked to an extent. You know, I get messages from people just all the time where they say, I saw you do this 4 years ago and now this is where I am today after seeing that and then making changes. For some people, they do send me a message and say, I watched your dumpster diving video and now 100% of my food pretty much comes from the dumpster. Or other people, you know, saw that I grew and, you know, foraged all my food for a year and then they started their first garden. Or, you know, the fact that I whittled my life down to just fitting in a backpack. People in 5-bedroom houses saw that and they got the empowerment to start whittling away at how much stuff they have, and you know, some of them now live in a van from a 5-bedroom house. So I do see extreme change. I mean, it's kind of interesting. For me, I've been doing this for 8 years now, and so it's pretty fun to meet people that say, I've been following you for 6 years. Since my first project, they say, I've been following you since that, and you know, literally you have helped me shift my mind on so many topics, and still today you're covering different topics, so still today I'm learning. So I mean, that's pretty much what keeps me going. The only reason I'm still going is because I have enough people tell me that I have truly positively impacted their life, and at the same time, very few people tell me that I'm destroying their life. If I had just as many people telling me that, well, you actually are ruining lives, but I don't. Like, my goal is to improve quality of life in a way that I'm not taking quality of life elsewhere. Like, as an example of that, you know, some people, it's Christmas time. What will they do? They're going to go and they're going to buy shoes for kids. Well, what if those shoes are made by kids working in slave labor in another place? those people feel great because they're helping these kids, but what if you're actually just as well harming other kids here? So my big focus is, how can I improve quality of life without decreasing quality of life elsewhere? And that's a tricky thing. You have to think a lot deeper.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes back to the environmental movement currently, is that most of it just doesn't think deeply. Like, I would like to know, I mean, when I see these tree planting campaigns where they're going to plant 20 million trees and they're $1 a piece, I've planted trees. I don't know how they really do it for $1 a piece and actually expect a high success rate. Like, I wonder, out of 20 million trees at $1 a piece, how many of those are actually going to survive? Are we talking about planting like little 1-inchers where a deer can eat, 50 in an hour? I don't know. But then, so I don't know. Everything's so much more complicated.
Yeah.
Than it seems.
100%. 100%. I've seen. So I met the owners of 10 Tree this year.
Okay.
I went to an event and they were kind of there, and I got to like really ask them. I'm like, do you guys like really know that these trees are going in the ground? And they're like, actually, yes.
Yeah.
We go in these tree planting things, and we know particular areas, and they were inspired mainly through some of the things that happened with the wildfires in their area. The original founder is from British Columbia.
Okay.
And so, I think they were inspired by different layers of these things. And I think that people are finding ways to do this. But I agree with you that the tree planting campaign stuff, I think it's great. Like, look, I love that a YouTuber, he doesn't have to do this.
Yeah.
Somebody gives him a challenge of finding a way to plant 20 million trees, and the guy finds literally within 60 days, whatever it is, 45 days, goes and raises $17 million.
Yeah.
He's a kid. He's a 21-year-old.
Wow.
On YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, I'm impressed.
Yeah,
I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed with what he was able to do, and other YouTubers he was able to inspire. And I think that there's kind of a culture right now where the youth is paying attention very deeply on social media. And I know you're no stranger to this, right? You make content with it. You support other people who make content around it. I've been seeing you share a lot of stuff with the story of stuff, and I would love to know more about what you're doing there and what's going on. But, and I love their work and what they're all about. But there's something to be said about now the influence of what Instagram and Facebook and, Twitter and all these things are having on the way that the youth see this. Mm-hmm. And I think for the first time ever, we get to participate in the narrative, right? Because back in the day, the narrative was whatever you saw on ABC or CNN or Fox or whatever, that's kind of painted the picture of your reality. I think today that's changed.
Yeah.
What is the role that you see that social media is playing in shifting that narrative war? Because I know you participate in it in some ways. I mean, the content you make lives there, and it spreads there, and it's a huge part of your kind of platform, let's say.
Yeah.
How do you feel that's happening, and do you still feel like that's still working? Is it kind of gotten to a point of saturation? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Social media has its pros and cons. I mean, at one time, in one vein, I think that social media is one of the greatest destroyers of our generation, losing attention span, inability to really connect with the world, complete addiction to these screens, and inability to connect. We see, depression at all-time highs, according to some studies. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just on a personal level, my vocabulary is not as good. My spelling is not as good. I think it reduces the ability for critical thinking and problem solving. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually pretty decent with my social media compared to some people. So totally. I think it's it could be one of the greatest demises, I don't know if that's a word, mm-hmm. to our society. But at the same time, it's one of the ultimate equalizers and the ultimate connectors. And it is the way to more freely spread information in a, as you would say, democratic way, where every person has the opportunity for a voice. So it's tricky. I mean, for me personally, when I think it's all about balance. We have to use these things wisely. The other challenging thing is that, the other day I was scrolling through Instagram. I went onto one of the hashtags, like environment or something. Mm-hmm. 95% of it was garbage content. And when I looked at and I saw 10,000 likes, 5,000 likes, and I saw this is what a majority of people, when they're being exposed to environment, this is what they're seeing. Unfortunately, it's a lot of highly misguided, short-sighted, narrow-minded thinking that's designed for virality. And so almost it's difficult, because I would almost say in many ways that social media is creating an uneducated environmental movement that doesn't really understand the problems. It doesn't go into the intricacies that is the reality. So I can't say anything definitively. It's got its pros and cons, and I don't know whether overall it would be helping or hurting. It does both at the same time.
It definitely does. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some obvious pros, but there's definitely some serious cons. What's next for you in terms of stories or challenges, or, you know, like how do you feel? I mean, I know it's such a typical question to come, like, you just finished one challenge, now what's the next one? But I know that I'm certain that you're the type of person who's already pondering something. And I would love to know about, like, what was some of the highest struggles that you had in this year as well. Like, I would love to go into depth of, you know, what's the thing you crave the most, or what's the one time you felt the weakest and you were like, oh, maybe this is the wrong move, or you know what I mean? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. But
sure. Well, first, as far as next, so yeah, that project was so immersive. I mean, a year is a long time with a project to that, you know, to that level. No eating over at a friend's house with their food, no buying anything at a grocery store or restaurant, like literally.
Definitely changes your social life for sure.
Yeah, it changed so much. And so it was, I thought afterwards what I really wanted to do is relax, maybe on a beach for a couple of months, but instead I'm just invigorated. I want to be out there. Like, you know, here I am in Montreal. I'm supposed to be at a beach in a warm place just relaxing after that year. But
you're in December in Montreal is a far cry from that beach. Yeah, I'll give you that.
But so basically what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to break free from two things. Social media, and then I've always been trying to break free from the need for material possessions. I guess, I don't know how to put it exactly, but I'm trying to connect deeply to just simply existing and removing all of these things that prevent us from really connecting with our bare selves. So for me, one of the ways of doing that is through not owning a lot of things and not creating an image through accessories, through material possessions and such. So right now, I'm working on getting everything I own to fit into a small backpack, like, you know, a small one. Right now, it all fits into a big duffel bag, a very heavy duffel. When I left Florida a week and a half ago, I left with like a 60-pound giant duffel bag, and it was miserable. I've already got down to like half the weight. And then on December 22nd in San Diego, I'm having an event where I'm going to lay out everything that I own onto a blanket at the beach. And the idea is I've invited people to come take the stuff. And I will walk away from there with just a small backpack, owning just a very few things. And I haven't been able to break free from some of these things. And this is the only way that I'm going to be able to do it. And I don't know what I'm going to walk away with. It's going to be it's an experiment for me. And it's one that I have slight nervousness about, because I've never gotten my life down to that level of simplicity. But so that's kind of what's next. I dream of owning absolutely nothing, like just pure existence. Wherever I need to go, just moving in that direction. Literally just going from the perspective of like almost like to champion a name that I think people will know, like a Bear Grylls, go out into the wilderness and just every day is a new adventure. Yeah, except for me, it's more of an immersion in humanity. So, you know, I used to be into survival, and I still, you know, think that survival is important. We have to be able to survive. But for me, like, I'm not trying to become independent of humanity, because one of my big messages is that we need to learn to share. We live on this earth. In the past, it was easy to think that the earth was this expansive, infinite place, and it had everything we need, and that there was no way we could possibly damage it. I mean, if it is
you
true
can never
that,
consume enough. Like, from your own perspective, there's no way that you individually or anyone you knew could ever consume enough that it would ever have that big of an
as a
impact.
humanity, the oceans were infinite.
Yeah.
Everything was infinite. But now, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the idea of traveling around the world most likely would kill you if you decided to do it. Now, anybody with a credit card can fly around the entire globe in 48 hours and get fatter while doing it with an almost 0% chance of any risk. So that is an example of just how ridiculously small this place is. This earth that we live on is tiny in the grand scheme of things. Now we know that the resources are finite, and now we know that we are pillaging it in a way that
total ecosystem collapse.
Yes, but the interesting thing is that when when we know that, which you and I do, and most of the people watching this and listening to this, what we realize is that we are neighbors. Like, even people on the other side of the world, we are neighbors on this very small planet that we live on. And so I don't have any desire to be independent from humanity, because I think independence is a complete delusion.
That is the apathy. That is like, it's not apathy, but it's part of it. We can't all do it. The 7.5 billion people can't run in every direction, and then we all have our own little corner of the world here. That's not going to work. We're going to have to collaborate.
In the past, before we knew, but today, and so, I guess that's, for me, it's that money is an example. Money makes people think they're independent, because they can just pass over the money for whatever goods or service they want, and then they can think that they earned everything, they worked for everything, and that they're completely independent. But the reality is there's somebody on the other side of all of those things. So for me, like, by stripping my life back to absolutely nothing, one of the main messages is I want to it's embracing my dependence on humanity, which in American society, we're kind of raised to be independent, that you don't need anyone else, I can do everything on my own.
And it's literally the culture.
Yeah.
Freedom and independence are like two words that I would associate to American, I'll call it propaganda, at least. The American narrative contains those two words incredibly powerfully.
Yeah.
More than any other country in the world, in my opinion.
And today, I think the only way we can really have true freedom is by working together with our local communities and our global communities. So for me, like, that's what I'm currently just excited about, running through my mind, just removing the material possessions from my life to an extreme to get people, shock people that are living in 5-bedroom houses and have tens of thousands of possessions, or even an apartment with hundreds or thousands of possessions. And just thinking about, do we really need all those things? But also just breaking free from these delusions that we have of independence, when, we are totally dependent upon each other.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I find it, put it this way, I'm at the peak of what I would consider to be the amount of stuff that is in my life. And I think a lot of my time is spent in this balance between, do I really need this? But also my it's almost like my will to communicate it as loudly as possible is this part of this megaphone that makes me think about it. And like, even when you coming here, I was like, fuck, I've got all this like beautiful podcast gear and all this stuff. Like, this is far from sustainable, right? If everyone had this, it would be a problem.
Yeah.
The point is, though, how much am I contributing to the solution by trying to like really communicate the story of what you do, or the story of what Valhalla is trying to create, which, for those of you who don't know, I'm involved in building an eco-village. We have a 66-acre property that we're looking to transform into homesteads that would build a community of 150 people. Why 150 people? Dunbar's number. It's a study that says that about 150 people is the amount of contacts or people that you can feel like you could build real, true trust and relationships with and kind of keep up with without having, I guess, apathy or kind of disconnection from those people, right? Or it's not to say you won't dislike them, but you will still at least know that community and participate in that community.
Yeah.
This journey for me, everything I know about content, everything I know about social media, everything I know about raising money on Kickstarter, everything I know about sustainability came with the narrative of me watching a ton of documentaries, realizing that all these documentaries did change my perspective. They did empower me. They did make me go out into the middle of that GMO cornfield and plant that tree. They did make me learn about earthships and permaculture and compost teas and all these things. And most of that information I'm learning from YouTube.
Yeah.
YouTube University is a massive resource.
Yep.
And at the same time, very rare, very, very rare that there's a trending video that talks about those things because the trending videos aren't that. They're very different, let's say, right? Yeah. They're memes or they're comedy or they're fail videos or they're makeup tutorials or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I truly struggle with, do I scrap the possessions? Do I go essentially in the direction you're going with? And you're moving that to the extreme because I think you can, and I think it's part of the experiments that you do with yourself, and I love that. And the choice that I made more recently is, let me go to the full extreme of what it would take for me, not to live a life of consumerism, but what would it take for me to try and build the biggest machine that could be the loudest of megaphones? And what does that look like? And I've spent a lot of time learning about the algorithms, learning about trying to build community that would actually come together and share messages. Like the first mastermind that when we met each other in Costa Rica, the first mastermind that I created was with that intention. Like, how do I bring the founder of Futurism and the founder of Collective Evolution and have them communicate so that their content would live together, and that some of the things that are communicated on this side and if some of the things communicated on that side could kind of cross-pollinate a little bit. And I don't know that, I guess I don't know that any of it is right or wrong in any direction. But I definitely struggle with the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's understandable. I do too. I mean, it's like, one way of looking at it is transitional ethics. We can't live out our ethics perfectly to create the change that we want, because that would basically make it impossible to spread the message. Yeah. Some people think that the most powerful thing I could do is go live in a cabin in the woods and just live it out fully. And in a way I agree, but I don't think that would make the biggest impact.
Definitely not.
But I don't know, you just zoom out even further, and we don't even know what a human is, and like what if we have free will, if you and I are choosing the word we're saying right now, if we are a simulation theory, or not, we are a simulation theory.
Is this a game that's playing out and we're just in a video game, or is this the Matrix? Is it not?
Yeah, we just don't know anything, which is why part of me doesn't take most things fully seriously, because I know that that life is a state of delusion. I think we know that life is a state of delusion.
I think we're trying to convince ourselves that it's not at all times.
I think people are, but I think it's a full state of delusion. I think, but I don't know. But just the fact that we think we're sitting still right now, when we know we're moving at,
we know we're vibrating, we know we're flying through space in some way, shape, or form.
And according to quantum physics, I'm not touching this table, and this table's nice. So and I believe a lot of that. So if that's the case, then you can only take things so seriously because we know that we are a complete state of delusion. So I don't know, everything's kind of tricky when you kind of zoom further back out.
Yeah. But when you get to that level, it's like, well, then everything's okay.
That's one.
Even the single-use plastics are okay.
I don't completely disagree with that.
I know.
Like anybody who has that philosophy, I don't shut them down.
Yeah. I went down a rabbit hole around what the word natural means, right? Just like in the terms of, is it natural that plastic, like somebody would say, plastics aren't natural, they're synthetic, right?
Yeah.
They're a fabrication.
Yeah.
True, but they come from this world.
Yeah, they do come from this world. It's a different way of looking at it.
Everything that is here that I have ever interacted with came from this world.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's natural.
Yeah.
It happened. It occurred. Right. Like, and I'm not trying to say it's good. I clearly don't support single-use plastics as much as I possibly can. And at the same time, I clearly do in some ways. Right. This came in a box, and it came in some plastic somewhere, was wrapped in, and many of the things that I've touched, and even if I don't want it to, somebody just unwrapped it from the plastic before me and then handed it to me without the plastic. I know that that's true. I know that that's happening essentially. I do agree. I love that you focused on food, because I do agree that that's the one thing that we all do all the time, every day. That if we can go through that gateway and understand where our food came from, and build food that is grown right next to us, and build that ecosystem around us, I believe that just that alone connects us back to nature in a very powerful way. And back to nature being forests and whatever, right? I think that is where the most likely solutions need to find themselves. And today I wrote kind of a story. I went and did ayahuasca. I'm assuming you're familiar, but for those who aren't, ayahuasca is a plant medicine that was used in traditional settings by indigenous people of mainly the lands of the Amazon, right? It comes from the kind of Amazonian areas. It's combining two plants, and you take this, and it kind of has a psychedelic effect. It releases DMT in your mind and all these things. Long story short, it's kind of a spiritual practice, of a spiritual awakening. And the main thing that came from me out of that experience is that I felt like I reconnected to nature again. It brought me back to my purpose, right? Which is, in the highest of levels, I kind of say, why? Simply because. Why do I do what I do? Simply because. But in the more practical, like day to day, it's about building some form of impact, some form of legacy that says, hey, I did what I could. I did what I could with what I had, and I hopefully inspired a generation of the next people behind me, or the people who watched whatever it is that I created, or who consumed it in some way, shape, or form, or who saw it, or felt it, or heard the story of it, that they maybe shifted 1 degree, or maybe they shifted half a degree in another direction, and it made them start to think and to question. And I believe that that's the most potent seed you can plant in someone else. But the shift that it kind of started to instill in me is that most of the way that I was trying to deal with building the solutions, quote unquote, that I'm trying to be a part of, I was still playing the game of like the normal capitalistic game in some way, shape, or form. And I thought to myself that the most radical thing that we can do at our farm is to do one way that I can change the game is to just say like, hey, we're growing food and it's available for anyone who comes and takes it. Hey, we're just gonna like ask that we can look you in the eye and shake your hand. You don't have to pay for it. You know, it doesn't have to be a money thing. It just has to be something that there was an energetic to it. There was a love and care that went into it. We hope that you would contribute back to that in some way, shape, or form. And that to me feels like a game B scenario. It feels like that's like, it's only through some of these extremes that we're going to find maybe the next quantum leap, like the leap into just a different way of thinking. And I do believe technology has a very important part to play in this. You know, like I was having a whole conversation with somebody yesterday about why Tesla is, from an automotive perspective, the most innovative company, and it's not because they make electric cars. It's because they are building autonomous cars. It's actually that will change the need for us to own cars in the first place. And it will change the effectiveness that transportation gets to have. And I think we can go deeper than that. I mean, I think what they want to do with the Boring Company and building kind of mass transit and systems that are powerful with that. And they had looked at hyperloops and all these other things. I think there's such beautiful lessons to be found. And what I like about somebody like an Elon Musk is the way that he thinks with a kind of a first principle thinking, which is it's thinking about things at a systemic level and a long-term thinking level that I believe we suffer from. I believe that the biggest challenge that we have is that we are conditioned to think short-term.
It's definitely one of our biggest challenges. We don't think very long-term at all.
Yeah.
10 years seems like a long time, but we know it's...
But the fruit trees you planted that you're not eating the fruits of yet, right? The fruit tree that I planted 8 years ago in the middle of that GMO cornfield, I had the first apple this year.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like,
when you mean GMO cornfield, you don't mean one that was still being used.
I mean one that the previous season was being used as a cornfield.
This whole time I was like, you know that the next year the Columbines just tore that tree down as they planted more corn.
No. We came in and took over the field.
Good to know.
Yeah. I went in the middle of the field, planted a tree, but then turned that tree, that field into what is now a restoring ecosystem. Cool. It's got many trees and wildlife, and we have bees. It's a whole system. I didn't just go into the field and hope that the tractor didn't just run it over the next year. Of course he did. It would have.
Sense.
No. It's now fully a new ecosystem, and we had to restore the soil, and it took years to do that, and still working on it, to be honest. And anybody who really farms knows that you're farming soil more than you're farming plants.
Yeah.
The long-term thinking.
Yeah.
Is really the lesson I've pulled away from it. What lessons are you kind of starting to come away with? Like, what are some of the deeper layers beyond just, okay, don't use plastics, and the average person who lives in New York uses a ton of garbage. What do you feel, if somebody who's listening to this and we're coming towards the end of our time here, what's the lesson you let somebody walk away with, or that maybe you've come to that goes a layer deeper than maybe what a random viral Facebook video would say?
I mean, I guess right now for me, I think that most people can benefit from is just knowing that nothing is black and white, and that anything that's posed as black and white online is probably incorrect. Because everything is, far more complex and things are just much more diverse and intricate than that. I think that if people just decided, if they just abolished this idea of black and white thinking, I think that would be a huge step forward in what we're doing. And labels, labels like vegan or zero waste, those are helpful because they give they give people things to attach to.
A great identity around.
But the problem is they create a false identity because you put so much energy. You can say, well, I'm vegan, so I can feel good about my life. But it's only a form of delusion to do that, because the reality is that our lives are destroying animal species in many ways beyond how we directly use them. Mm-hmm. So basically, I mean, I guess I would just love to see people think more critically and use labels and pigeonholing a lot less, and just have much more honest conversations with themselves and with the people around them.
Beautiful. And I think the most human way, the best way to build a movement is to also to admit the challenges where we struggle with it. And so what, in this last year that you spent foraging, where were the points of contention? Where were the points of challenge and struggle? Like, where are the things that you're still working on today too? So that somebody knows that, Rob, super amazing guy when it comes to, sustainability and doing all these things. And at the same time, like you said, you're still struggling with some of the possessions that you have, even though you're down to way less than what most people have. Where do you still feel like, where's your next edge? I mean, you've mentioned the possessions piece, but was there a particular edge that you maybe bumped up against in that year or whatever?
Well, there's plenty of things in that year, but just as far as the idea of growing and foraging all my food, but in the bigger picture, I mean, for me, one of my biggest challenges is that have some form of addiction to social media. I guess it's also just an addiction to productivity, and not honoring the long walk or the fresh air as much as I should. So, I mean, that balance of living truly in the present versus the constant productivity of online, of email, social media and such, that's something that I'm always working with and that I hope to overcome. The other thing for me is just making sure that my work is really not coming from a place of privilege, and making sure that it's actually accessible. Like, in the zero waste movement, for example, so much of the content that's being put out is really just geared towards people with enough money who live in, middle and upper income areas, and
those types of like special grocery stores where you can buy everything without packaging is available. There's lots of things that help that. Yes. Yeah,
not like, and a lot of people, they don't realize they're doing that because they've never lived in an area where there is nothing but a corporate grocery store or a Walmart or something like that. So for me, I mean, that's my constant battle, is making sure that the work that I'm doing is actually really applicable to everyone, and not just to the privileged group of people. And that's a very challenging thing to do, because you have to think a lot more, you have to understand many more perspectives, you have to bring many more people to the table. It's a lot more challenging, it requires more thinking, and it requires more work. So, but that's a focus of mine, and something that I'm putting a lot of my thought and energy into, and hope to only always move forward in that regard. Sometimes I've been focusing on that for a few years now, and sometimes I get stagnant, and so continuing to move forward and making sure that that is done well. Those would probably be those would be the two things
edges.
that
Beautiful. Anything else you want to share, say, any messages, anything you want to let people know, where they can find more, what you're doing, where they can learn about some of the exploits that you've taken or the challenges you've taken on, anything like that?
Well, December 22nd, San Diego. It's I can't remember, what did I say? The end of Saratoga. If you go to my Facebook, Instagram, either of those, you'll see where I say the address. Come meet me there, 2:00. Come take home a possession of mine with you. Help me. And then other than that, I mean, I do post a lot online. YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram are the places I'm the most active, so people can join me there. And my website is definitely got a lot of information on it.
Yeah, totally.
Of just it's solution focused. There's hundreds of pages of how people can be the change they wish to see in the world. So join that, and then just get out in your community. After this is over, turn this off and go outside, hug a tree, take some fresh air, swim in a pond, hug people, try to get your 8 to 10, 12 hugs in a day.
Go guerrilla garden, I love that one.
Plant some stuff. As Ron Finley says, I don't swear, but he says plant some shit. He's one of my favorite guys. That was my 1 or 2 swear words of the month you just got right there.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think Ron Finley's done some great work in his messages. He's also a former guest on the podcast as well. Cool. Well, thank you, man. Thank you for doing everything you do, and thank you for living it to the fullest, and for being just a student of life in that way. You know what I mean? I think it's noble, and I know you've inspired a lot of people. You've definitely inspired me, and you've made me start to think more. Ironically, you've radicalized the way I want to express some of the things that I believe that I stand for, and that I value, and that I know many around me value as well. So,
good to hear.
Thanks a lot.
Keep on expressing. And thanks for all these devices that we could use to spread the word today.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for those of you, all the links in the comments below, make sure to comment, like, share, doing all of those things. And here's why I tell you to do this. You got all the way here. If you listen to this whole thing, it means it had value for you, and it probably has value for somebody in your life. And this is the way that these movements get to kind of spread. Not because I believe I have the answer, but because, well, maybe there's something inspiring for someone in your life and what you're doing. So tune in, subscribe, like, comment. Let me know if there's any questions you might have. Leave them down below, and I'll make sure myself or Rob sees them. And love you all.